Welcome to another Blue Room Weekly with myself, Warren. Apologies for no weekly last week due to the Monday night game and the different scheduling around the Blue Room. We weren't able to bring you it last week. I also had a little bit of a tough time at work, just getting away for the evening to be able to record as well. So that's why we didn't have a show last week. But thankfully, we are back again this week. And I'm delighted to say that I've got Paul McPartland back with us. We've also got the brilliant Rob Vieira back, making a return to the weekly, and John Wharton should be back with us later. So we've got a packed show. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Palace win, a little bit about a couple of things around that win, and maybe a couple of positional changes going forward. And then just a look around the league to see what we feel about how other teams are doing in comparison to our brilliant Toffees. So lots coming up on the show to talk about with the lads. But as always, we're going to start with a little bit of a reflection from the game at the weekend. And Paul, I've been listening to post-match, Blue Monday, Byline, and I think the lads so far have talked wonderfully about the fact that, it wasn't the greatest first half, a much better second half. And, me personally, I thought on reflection, a draw probably would have been satisfying, but it was lovely, wasn't it, just to be on the other end of that. How many times down the years have we seen Everton probably should have put the game to bed or kill a game and not put away chances only to suffer a poor result at the end of it? It was nice to have the shoe on the other foot for once, wasn't it?
Oh, it certainly was, Warren. And it was really good as well. This is the first time this season we come back from a goal behind against a team who've been unbeaten this season in a fine, rich vein of form, really difficult opponents who, as you say, maybe, could have maybe gone 2 goals up during the game, but they didn't take their chances, And so often we've said about Everton, we haven't taken our chances. And this game, it was good to see the roles reverse. Definitely a game of 2 halves. I've often been critical of David Moyes for not making the substitutions quickly enough. I think he saw in the first half that unless he'd make some changes, that we weren't going to get back in this game. Thought Chino Barry was incredibly disappointing up front in the first half as well. And I think Tyler Dibling, for whatever reason, just struggled to get in the game. He will get better, obviously, and Barry will get better. But those changes had to be made at half-time. I don't know about you and Rob, but I've always been a big fan of Charlie Alcaraz. I think he makes things happen. And I think when he came on the second half, he just upped the tempo of the game. He gave their midfield something to deal with. He ran at people. He tackled people. He ran into space. He made the passes. And I've always believed that him and Besso actually work quite well together. To me, Besso's best Everton games have been when Alcaraz has been the supply lifeline for him as well. So, a much more encouraging second half display. Besso, without dominating their defence particularly, just caused them lots of problems and gave them something to deal with, which they didn't have to deal with in the first half with Barry. And he was a threat. He made himself available. He ran into space. He put a few good, strong aerial challenges in. And but for a stunning save from Dean Henderson, that header would have given him a goal. Credit to Jack Grealish for being in the right position to follow up. And it was funny, when we got the penalty, I remember thinking to myself, if we get this penalty, we're going to win this game because the momentum is just with us. And you can see the Palace faded a little bit. We took full advantage of that. And I was kind of a bit disappointed last Monday with the West Ham game with the crowds. I thought the crowd was very quiet, completely different on Sunday. The crowd really got behind the team, and you could just see the players responding to that. You can see Palace, to some extent, even being a bit intimidated by that as well. The noise when it got going was absolutely fantastic, and I just loved coming out of the game on Sunday when our seats in the West Stand, so we're on the lower terrace, as we were coming out. All the people in the upper South Stand are coming down the escalator, all singing Everton songs. And it was just a great party atmosphere. People are coming out of the stadium singing like we used to outside Gladys Street, but we're much more cramped and contained there. This just carried on all the way into the plaza. So it was good to go into the international break with a real positive vibe, real positive buzz. And it's good to see that, we go into this break not being the team on Merseyside with problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're certainly the up and informed team on Merseyside at the moment. Well, as far as last weekend's concerned, anyway. But we are Palace's kryptonite. I mean, I think you mentioned that there, Paul, about it being the first time this season we've come from behind and won. And I know that the last time we did that was ironically against Palace as well. So we certainly are an issue for them and a bit of a cursed team for them. But that's obviously great for us. But I think, Rob, that, I think Paul's right in what he's saying about the the fact that the crowd were definitely up for it once that penalty went in. And I think that it was great to see that the momentum and the intensity being played. I thought there was a real lack of intensity in that after the penalty was certainly encouraging. And I think absolutely the subs were to do with that, and part of the reason. Just your opinions on the substitutes, mate. Paul made the point there out the fact that Moyes has sometimes been accused of not making the subs at the right time. He was quite ruthless, quite clinical with making them substitutions on Sunday at half time, and especially Charlie Alcaraz made all the difference, didn't he?
Yeah, I thought Charlie Alcaraz was the difference. And I feel like every time, I mean, I've said this before, and it really started upon his arrival at the club. Charlie Alcaraz is one of those guys that just gets on the pitch and stuff happens. And generally it's good stuff. But there's something about his energy. And I would even say some of the things that probably fall a bit into, football cliches that we have to be careful about. But in terms of, he's a guy that comes on the pitch completely unafraid, right? He comes onto the pitch. He wants the ball. He is decisive with it once he gets it. He is unafraid to not only run hard out of possession, but in possession, running straight towards the keeper with the ball. I mean, and I think that was ultimately the key. I don't want to take anything away from Beto. Beto didn't do really anything in the second half to suddenly magically make the striker more dangerous. I think that there are some things with the attack right now that don't seem to be leveraging the striker much at all. But what I do think was different was when you moved Njai out of the 10 role and you inserted Alcaraz there. That seemed to kind of liven things up. That combined with what you would always expect to be, after such a poor first half, in a game that was still definitely, attainable in terms of a result. You're only down 1-0 at halftime. You sort of expected Moyes to kind of read them the riot act and for them to go out and play a little bit better. But I do think specifically and fundamentally, it was the change to Alcaraz. It was the type of game where his sort of energy and his ability to just kind of, move, put his thumb on the scale of the overall kind of feeling of momentum, which Palace certainly had in the first half. And if anything, I mean, I think that Palace fans are lamenting the fact that they should have probably been 2-0 up before, we get the penalty and equalize. I think that made a huge difference. And the fact that we can talk about bringing a difference maker off the bench in a scenario like this, in a scenario where we're down 1-0, we're able to come back and win against the most informed, arguably the most informed team in football. One who I don't know that I can recall in all of my years of watching the Premier League that Palace have been in a better moment than this. I guess this is what it feels like to be Bournemouth against us, guys. Is our ability, to see Palace no matter what the circumstance and find a way to perform. But look, I am excited about what this thing could look like if we put two straight halves like that together at some point. But ultimately, at the end of this, we're in eighth. I think that overall, I would probably argue we're performing maybe even a little bit better than I would have expected. Though obviously there are some things in the schedule that, depending on how you look at that so far, kind of factor into that. But the bottom line is that this is the type of game we have lost so many times or let get away from us so many times over the last several years. To me, these are the types of moments that you can build on and point to and say, look, that is not who we are anymore. This is who we are. 1-0 is not going to end the game for us. And I thought that beyond the tactics and, even beyond the substitutions to a large degree, this was about a gut check and this was a test, and Everton found a way. And that's something that you can absolutely build on moving forward.
I think for me, I always feel Palace are an awkward side. And I know recently we've had a very good record against them. But I always feel, for instance, when you go down to Selhurst Park, it's always going to be a really tough game. I think they've always, certainly in the last 5-6 years, they've always had a team that have players who can hurt you and who can do damage against you. And I think as well that for me, I think if you can get any sort of victory against the Palace team, I think it's a really good victory to get. And just on the current form as well, I mean, much was made about the 19 win, or the 19, game unbeaten run, and they were fully deserved of that. And I think that, for me, prior to the West Ham game, I was looking at the next 2 home games and thought to myself, if we can get 4 points out of the next 2 games, that would represent good value. I expected 3 points against West Ham.
Exactly, right.
And I did, I expected 3 points against West Ham. I thought a point would have been good against Palace. And even yesterday, post West Ham,
Speakers aren't working.
I thought that a point would have been quite I thought a point would have been still quite a good result for Palace. I look at it now and I think to myself, do you know what? That's a fantastic win. That's a really good win against a really good informed side. If they'd have taken the win and put their chances away, we're looking at a Palace team that are in second place at the moment, Paul. And I look at Everton now. We're in 8th. We are, not quite a quarter of the way through the season, but if we maintain current form and we go off where we are now, we are looking at a really healthy finish towards the end of the season. I know obviously a lot of things can happen during the season, injuries, suspensions, loss of form, that type of thing. But the positive side of me, even though I was bitterly disappointed we couldn't get the victory against West Ham, and probably feel that we maybe should have got more against Villa, and that would have put us 4 points better off and looking even more healthier in the table. The positive side of me says that, we're above where we were last season. We're looking a lot more threatening. We've ground out a win when we probably shouldn't have yesterday. This 8th place finish now, is this reasonable for Everton? And is this a target, maybe this this top 10? I thought we'd maybe get mid-table at least. But after the first 7 games, is this about right for where Everton can and should aim for, Paul?
Yeah, in terms of where we should aim for, I think that's definitely right at the moment, Warren. In terms of where I thought we might be at this stage of the season, I think it's kind of exceeded my expectations a little bit. I think a few of us we kind of had a few concerns about the new stadium factor. Would the team adjust to the new stadium? Would the new stadium still have the same kind of goods and effect for visiting teams? So I think that was something in the background, but I think the team and the fans are both adapted really well to the new environment as well. And if you'd said to me at the start of the campaign, your first 5 home games, you'll be unbeaten and you would have conceded 1 goal in 5 games, then I'd have snatched your hand off of that. In terms of what's a realistic position for Everton, I think that's a different question, isn't it? I do think we're a work in progress. I do have some reservations that we're kind of 1 or 2 bad injuries away from maybe hitting a bit of a losing streak, but I think a top half finish, to me, we've got a squad that's definitely capable of a top half finish. I think the question then boils down to it, is that then good enough to push on to a 7th place finish? Because 7th place will get us into the Europa League. Now, bearing in mind that some of the teams that did well last season, Nottingham Forest, for example, have kind of fallen away a bit this season. Maybe there's an opportunity there. I don't know. I don't want to be overly optimistic because obviously I'm an Everton fan. I'm not used to being optimistic, but it is something that you look at that league table and think, well, we're out of the European place on goal difference at the moment. Now, some of those fixtures you referred to there as well, I'd add Leeds United that one as well as a game. Maybe we could have got a point from as well. So there have been opportunities wasted. But also, I agree with you for the Crystal Palace game. Before that match, I'd been really happy to get a draw against an informed Palace team who've done really well this season, coming to Bramley-Moore on a high, and then to beat them and come back from 1-0 down. Really, I drew lots of encouragement from that as well. And going back to what I said before, I was also highly encouraged by the fact the manager made the substitutions at the right time, because I was getting a bit concerned, particularly in the West Ham game, that when we obviously needed a change of playing style, we needed, I think Rob used the phrase there before about someone coming like is a change making, makes an impact, and that's what Charlie Alcaraz did, and maybe he should be given an early opportunity of the West Ham game as well. But going into the second international break now, this is the second consecutive international break we're going into on a high, so things are kind of feeling very positive at the moment around the club. Because we'll have to see how the injuries with Branthwaite and Michael Keane develop, because that could have an impact on team selection, team style, team formation. But at the moment, apart from, I think we still have our doubts about our striking options. Given the squad we've got at the moment, given the options on the bench, I think we're in a very healthy position, and I would still I'd be happy if we finished in the top half of the table, but I'd be delighted if we sneaked into 7th place.
You might have heard me during my previous monologue there, just explaining if, the next question set up for Paul. And John Wharton might have said something about his mic not working, but he does join us now, John. And John, you would have heard Paul talking there, saying about hopefully your mic is working, by the way, but you would have heard Paul talking there about the fact of where Everton may potentially finish. And we were just talking about the fact that currently we sit 8th and it's been a relatively decent start. I feel we could be a few more points better off, but in the context of where we were last season, it's a massive improvement. And you've been on the weekly the last couple of weeks, John, where we've talked about Everton in a real positive frame. We've said about how there's a real good feel factor around the club, and then we suffered that exit to Wolves, a couple of defeats, a couple of not great performances, and then it felt like we were brought back down to earth again. I feel we're probably somewhere in the middle, but we can achieve something a lot better than what we did, or certainly have done in previous seasons. Where do you think, going into this second international break, Everton sit in terms of the potential for going forward? Are we a side that can threaten Europe, or can threaten them top 8, top 9 positions, or are we destined for another mid-table finish again?
Can you hear me, by the way? Just checking.
Yeah, hear you great. Yeah. Loud and clear.
It's a funny season this season, because you've got clubs like Palace and Bournemouth who are in Europe. Not Bournemouth, sorry. Forest, who were in Europe. And so they were the teams who qualified last year, and they seem to be, okay in terms of how they're doing in Europe. But you could really see how jaded Palace were on Sunday, late in the game, after they're flying over to Poland and back. And Forest haven't really got going at all this season. So there's space to definitely push up. But I think once you get outside the top 4 of the Premier League, I think you get away from Liverpool, Chelsea, City and Arsenal. And I don't think that the quality is that great at all in the league. I think there's loads of teams that are much of a muchness. We're talking 18 months ago, we were saying, how great Brighton were, and how Brighton were a club that we should be striving to push on from and try and look at how they do things. But if you look at it now, I think we're better than Brighton. I don't mean that any disrespect to Brighton, but they've just had a couple of little knocks and that, and players gone, and I think we're better than. I think we should be looking for 9th, 8th, 9th, maybe push on for Europe. I don't think that's unrealistic in what I think is really a poor quality league.
Rob, do you want to come in with your thoughts as well? Because I know you've got some ideas on this. I don't know. I think that we've played less than 20% of the season. You know what I mean? And I'm still probably in that phase where I'm just trying to kind of figure out what this squad is, what this team really is. I think David Moyes is frankly trying to figure that out as well. I think trying to fully assess the top end potential of this thing when we haven't even had our best player play a minute yet in the league. I'm interested in that. I also want to see the continued kind of development of the attack, which I think right now is one of those that at times can look really good, and then at other times, like you've seen against West Ham or against Leeds, just kind of disappear on you. I think that there is a lot to still be learned, and I'm just kind of in that phase where there's a difference between can and could, right? Can and should. I do think in a league that's as weird as this one, that we could finish as high as, 7th, 8th. Why not? Right. There is another part of me though that says, I like John's confidence. I don't know that I believe we're definitely better than Brighton. Maybe we are. I'd like to see how the rest of the season goes. I think injuries play into that, but I wouldn't even isolate against one team. I mean, teams below us currently, like Brighton, sure, but then it's Villa, then it's Newcastle, it's United. Forest are 17th right now and a huge disappointment, but would anyone be shocked if at some point they figure some things out and go on a run? I mean, I wouldn't be. It may not happen, but I think that we get very focused, and I understand why, on results, and results are what matter, and it's a bottom line business. And these are words that I have said on these airwaves many, many times. But I do think that I think one thing we have to kind of ask ourselves too is, is the goal to just, hey, we finish as high as we can, no matter what. And obviously that always feels like it should be the goal. And I don't really have a problem with that, but there's a part of me that also is kind of like, I'm mostly concerned because I feel like we are a side that from an expectation standpoint is probably picked to finish mid-table. I know I'm the one. No one wants to hear this, but I'm interested in seeing how David Moyes develops the players that we've brought in. I am interested in seeing him figure out what to do with the tools at his disposal to make this squad the best version of itself. I think on some level he came in and took over Sean Dyche's team and almost in some ways seemed more comfortable with that group than what he's kind of got on his hands right now, which, in his defense is missing Jerry Branthwaite, is, dealing with a lot of shuffling and dealing with not having a fullback and all those things. So my point simply is that anything is still kind of possible, but I think that ultimately when you're only this shallow into, only this much into a season, I'm mostly paying attention to how do we look, how are we doing from a consistency standpoint. And what I would say is that I think it's very tempting after a very impressive win against Palace, against a super informed side like that, to start talking about, hey, could we finish in Europe? Could we get as high as 7th or 6th or whatever? But I do think that West Ham result combined with this result is probably a more accurate picture of where we're at, in terms of there are going to be weeks where we look really good, and there are going to be weeks where we are just, completely unable to wrap our brains around how we could look so mediocre. And I think that when you have a squad that is both impacted by injury, is a mix of both new players and, let's be honest, players that have been around for a long time who've been part of a lot of losing and mediocrity at Everton, you're going to have this sort of mishmash inconsistency of effects for a bit. And so I kind of am still expecting mid-table, but I'm not ruling out anything. I just want to learn more about this side as we play more games. I hope that's not a non-answer, Warren, but that's my best answer.
No, I think that's wonderfully put. And I mean, look, it's still very early days. We're only 7 games in. I thought it'd just be an interesting thing to look at, because there's been a lot of talk about, especially since the Wolves Cup defeat, about Everton's expectations and what really is this squad capable of. And I think in some ways we maybe went slightly over the top after the back-to-back wins we had against Brighton and against Wolves in the league. But I also feel with that we have every right to feel that way. We haven't had a lot of joy over these last couple of seasons, and I think we started to see a team that looked like it is capable of getting wins like they did yesterday. Not yesterday, but in Sunday's game against Palace. And I think that's reasons to be excited. But I think you've hit the nail on the head, Rob. I think we are probably somewhere in the middle of being a team that some weeks will look mediocre and some weeks will look, world beaters and capable of getting like top 6. But I think as the season pans out, we'll obviously get more of an idea of where Everton will finish. But look, on current form and after 7 games, if we maintain that, we're going to look at a very healthy finish towards the end of the season, which can only be good. Just before we move on, lads, to talk about some of the stories going around the Premier League at the moment and assessing what we feel about that. Just one thing I wanted to touch on. There's been a lot of talk about the substitutes, obviously, and some of the strength and depth that we've got in the squad now and competition for places. And there's also been a lot of talk about the gaps in the squad and where we might be missing. And obviously much of the talk, and it will rumble on until we sign a player who can fit that position. But a lot of the talk has been around the fullback position, and we were forced into a substitute on Sunday with Michael Keane going off injured, where we brought Tim Irabunam on, slotted him into midfield, and then Jake O'Brien went across into centre-back to partner James Tarkowski, and we put the very versatile James Garner at right-back. I've heard a lot of calls, particularly on post-match and on Blue Monday and Byline shows this week, that perhaps that's the way to go forward until January at least, where hopefully we can bring in another right-back. But James Garner, for me, has been our player of the season so far. I know some people might disagree with that and might have their own ideas of who's been their best player in these opening games. But for me, I don't think James Garner's put a foot wrong. I think he's been excellent, and I think his versatility is a real strength for us at the moment, especially when we are missing certain players. But I think he looks so calm, and he looks so much more of made so much more of a difference to the balance of the team when he slotted in at right back, and we just looked a better side for that. And obviously that relied on, Tyram Abunam having the performance he did on Sunday as well. You need someone in that midfield to do that as well, to maybe not make us need James Garner back in the middle. But if I come to you first, Paul, on this, is that an idea going forward that we should explore James Garner in that right back position to maybe not allow Jake O'Brien's deficiencies get, or maybe get found out by opposition teams? Because I think Jake O'Brien has suffered from being that player who's playing out of position. James Garner seems like a fit for there at the moment, albeit temporarily.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, haven't we, more than the fact that James Garner, played for England under 21s in the World Cup version 2 or 3 years ago now. So he has shown he can play in that position. I think the debate's more about whether I agree with you. I think Garner's had a really good season, by the way, so far. So the debate is, if you pull Garner out of that midfield role, do you lose something in midfield by putting them at right back? That's kind of a balance now for the manager to consider. In terms of Jake O'Brien, yeah, I think he has struggled, particularly in the West Ham game, but I thought he did okay against Crystal Palace. He seems to be revived and re-energised as well. So do I see James Garner as a long-term solution at right back, given our current predicament there? Yes, possibly. There's worse choices that can be made. And I noticed that Nathan Patterson was on the bench on Sunday. At some stage, do we think, hang on, this guy's a right back, should we give him a go at right back and see how it works out, and then decide whether James Garner's the better answer? I don't know, but it just seems to me strange that the one kind of full back who's in the squad apart from Seamus Coleman is Nathan Patterson, and he's never really proved himself with any of the previous managers. With the Scottish manager, could he respond in a way that we expect? I don't know. I think that's something that needs to be tested out.
It feels very much, Paul, sorry to interrupt, it feels very much like there's got to be a lot to happen before Nathan Patterson even gets a sniff. I mean, I feel very much like his career's finished now, but I know a lot of people after the performance that first half were calling for him to come on.
No, I agree, Warren. I think he's been really underwhelming, and he suffered injuries quite a bit at Everton as well. So I'm not suggesting he's the long-term solution. But
no, of course not. Yeah.
But if you talk in terms of putting players in their natural position, then I think at some stage he has to come into consideration just by virtue of the fact he's a right back. Now, if it turns out he's not suitable in that position, and I'm kind of on your side with this one, that I do think after Everton, if he doesn't make it here, where does his career go? He's kind of wasted 4 years here, not being able to establish himself in the team. So going back to his point about James Garner, James Garner right back, I'm fine with that. I think a lot really depends now on the situation with Branthwaite as well, doesn't it? When is he coming back to fitness? Also depends on Michael Keane. How long is Michael Keane going to be out for as well? So there might well be a scenario whereby David Moyes has no other choice but to put James Garner right back. And I think the one thing you can always rely on from James Garner, and you've seen it more and more this season, is no matter what position of the team you're playing, you're going to get a really, really good, strong, committed performance. And going back to my original point, my only major sort of doubts about playing him at right back would be, do we then lose something in midfield? I thought Tim had a good game when he came on a sub on Sunday, but he's another player I'm not 100% convinced about is a regular starter for the team. So if it's the choice of James Garner staying in midfield or going to right back, I think I'd still stick with him in midfield.
John, how do you assess James Garner's season so far? And do you think that the right back position for him, albeit if it's only for a short period, is something we should be looking at?
I think Garner's been one of our better players, but I'm still not convinced on him. I still think he tends to disappear in games. And on Sunday, I thought he was quite poor until he got moved to right back. Then when he got moved to right back, he offered more movement, a bit more dynamic play at right back. But I don't know. I think at the moment, I'm not convinced with the midfield options. I don't think Irbunam's a 90-minute player. Irbunam's a player who you can bring on, and he plays really well when the game's stretched. He's got that movement and that little bit of pace that you can expose when teams are tired. You saw that on Sunday. You saw that in the derby last season. He was pushing up, and it was his nod on to Tarkowski that set up that equaliser. But I don't think he's ready to play 90 minutes in the Premier. I mean, I think we're starting to realise now maybe we sent the wrong player out on loan from midfield. So I
like that. That's a saucy take there, John.
Yeah, I just think Harrison Armstrong's the kind of midfielder we don't have. He's comfortable on the ball. Garner's good with the ball, but he's not great moving forward with the ball. Garner's a get the ball, give it, and move, isn't he? He's not really a creative type player himself. But I think he looked really good at right back, and I think he's looked good at full back. And I just think at the moment we haven't got the options of full back. And as Nathan Patterson, I think he's a busted flush at Everton. I'm still convinced he was a joke between Benitez and Gerrard at our expense.
Do you know what? I've said this before on this show. I was so excited when we signed him because I do watch a lot of football north of the border, and I've watched a few Scotland games, and he always looked like a really promising fullback. I think he's been unfortunate with a couple of injuries and a few changes in managers that we've had. It probably has stalled his career a bit, and he has had the odd
being good enough.
Yeah, I think a lot of all them things mixed in has really stalled his career, which is a real shame. Rob, just your final thoughts on this then. I mean, I think that it's interesting to hear both Paul's and John's take on Garner so far and where he potentially could play. How do you feel about the situation? I mean, are we going to lose something too much if we take him from midfield and put him into that right back slot, or would that just help Everton out?
Well, first of all, I agree with you completely on Garner being our player of the season so far. I mean, I don't know, is it Phil Neville like whatever? Just the ability to be just kind of put him wherever, and he'll do a job. Hopefully we like Garner by the end more than we like Phil Neville by the end. I don't know. But what I would say is that with James Garner, the difference this season is that I actually feel, and not to be super harsh here, but James Garner has existed at Everton for a few years in one of the more anonymous fashions that I can remember a player who seemed to play every week does. I have joked with people in our group chat that I feel like there are times over the last couple of years where I go months without even noticing that James Garner plays for us, even though he's out there. I think for a long time, he's sort of just been a guy in midfield. Now, granted, part of that is because he was young, and I don't know, not to be too on the nose here, but sometimes a player takes time to become the player that he can ultimately be, and it's going to take him actually playing and figuring it out. And you hope at some point that if a player gets enough opportunities that they eventually begin to show something. I think on the one hand, James Garner finally is beginning to show some of the promise that so many saw out of him. Whereas Nathan Patterson has been here also for a few years, and just it has never seemed to work. And after a long enough period of time, I think you then say, look, it almost doesn't matter the reasons why it's not working after a few years. It just, it's not going to work. I think James Garner came into this season very much at an inflection point where if he had not shown some of this, then I think you would have really been looking at him as, well, he's a guy, he's a squad player. But what I do think now, to answer your question about right back, is that during that period of the last couple of years when I've felt very underwhelmed by James Garner at midfield, I have said multiple times, now granted, this is because the bar is so low when you don't sign fullbacks, or, you keep Seamus, Seamus Coleman is at the club, but he's not been available for a variety of reasons. But I've always thought that James Garner's, I used to say that I thought right back might sneakily be his best position. Now, I think that he's showing the quality in midfield now that I think people were looking for, in the last couple of years. He's showing it this season. But I do think he's viable, and I do think he's the best right back option at the club right now. Not to say Coleman can't give you a game every once in a while, but clearly he is not at that stage physically where you can rely on him to play week in and week out. I like the idea of Garner at right back for a period of time until we buy a proper right back. But I would also say, the old saying is that necessity is the mother of invention. I think that we have to embrace, I think part of what you try to take advantage of when you don't have the expectations on you to finish in European spots is to look at situations like this and say, okay, we've got some injuries and that's not great, but what can we learn about players that we didn't know before? What does James Garner look like at right back for maybe a run of games? To answer the question of, do we lose too much in the midfield? Well, hopefully, Merlin Philippe Gabam and Roll is back in the side at some point here soon. And maybe we can learn a little bit more about what he's got in midfield if Garner is going to play, right back. Or, I think to John's point, I don't totally disagree. I think if Harrison Armstrong was 2 years older and looked exactly the same and had played exactly the same and produced exactly the same, there is no way he would have been sent out on loan. I just think that people cannot look past the age and say he's not ready, but I would have thought he could have been at least a productive player. Having said all that, I'm probably glad that he is getting the minutes that he needs and so on and so forth. So the bottom line with James Garner is that I think that he is the type of player that, regardless of position, he is showing that you must include him in the 11 somewhere, and that when you do, he is going to, add something. He is going to give you a good floor, and at times, can hit a pretty good ceiling. We've seen with some of the the goal he's scored and some of the plays he's made so far. So I don't have a problem with him at right back, and in fact, I think that if Keane is injured in any kind of significant way, I also think that gets us to a point where, hey, maybe it's time to find out what Jake O'Brien, the center half, can do at center half. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there are lots of, as much as we don't want injuries, I think that injuries reveal things. Branthwaite being injured allowed Michael Keane to show that he can still play at a certain level, right? When called upon. Doesn't mean I think he should be starting over Branthwaite or anything wild.
I was just about to say, that's a really big statement from you.
No. Look, well, and again, guys, what I would say, guys, is that, when you're talking about, like, I'll use Keane or I'll use Garner as an example.
Yeah.
Use some of the patience, like some of the weird reactions that you're already seeing towards, turning on these young players, to me, is coming from a lot of the same people who are celebrating the, look at James Garner and look at Michael. I mean, Michael Keane has taken 9 years at the club to get into a stretch of form like this. So, like, why don't we take a fraction of that grace and apply it to some of these young players as well, who will eventually, with some time and care may turn into something. But let's also just admit we don't know the answers to those things. And my point is simply that these injuries are not great. But they do, at least, they do put us in a position where we get to figure out things about some players that we need to know the answers to going into seasons beyond this one. I know I'm not saying not to focus on this season, but I am saying knowing if Jake O'Brien can be your starting center half down the road is an important thing to learn now. Learning what James Garner's best position is, and again, I think it's probably midfield, but knowing that he could play right back at this level, that makes him more valuable to me. Find that out now. Like, these are opportunities. These are not necessarily end of the world type things. And I'm looking forward, if James Garner gets any kind of extended run at right back, I actually think that's pretty interesting. And I want to see what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one note on Harrison Armstrong. I've got a friend who's a big Preston fan, and by all accounts, they're absolutely delighted with him at the moment. He's playing really well down there, so I think that's only going to aid his development. So that's really pleasing to hear, and I think it's going to be interesting.
Warren, just on Harrison Armstrong, I mean, I don't think he starts the game. He hasn't started the game for Preston, has he?
I think he started the last two, because I know when I spoke to the friend about it.
Yeah,
I know when I spoke to a friend, he hadn't started at that point, but he said
that's what I was thinking. Yeah. Oh, good.
A couple of cameos.
If he's getting game time, that's better than, that's good.
Yeah, a couple of cameos he made, he looked impressive. And then since he started, I think they've been absolutely delighted with the couple of starts he's had. So that bodes well.
And then
obviously, as we've talked about, it's going to be interesting to see where Everton go forward. I definitely wouldn't be opposed to seeing James Garner at right back. I think he's done really well there, and he's done well wherever he's been thrown. And certainly one of our high points and high spots this season. Since with it being international week, look, we all can't stand the international break. I think we find it a little bit tedious, a little bit boring, but they've got to find it somewhere in the calendar. But with it being international break, I thought it'd be a good opportunity on the weekly to have a little discussion about what's going on around the league at the moment, and a couple of big stories going on at the moment, particularly around Nottingham Forest, Paul, and Notts Forest, should I say, and it seems like a bit of a mess there at the moment. I mean, with the sacking of Nuno, who's coming to West Ham, and I mean, I know he's only got the point against us and they lost to Arsenal, but he seems to have made a bit of a difference and added a bit of solidity to them, I suppose. And Ange Postecoglou's come in, who, yes, we know has won the Europa League last year, but was probably accused as well of being, a little bit gung-ho at his time at Spurs, and he's not won a game in 7 for a team that were really impressive last year and had a very good season, getting into Europe. I can see them struggling this season. It's a bit of a worry for them, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. There's no doubt that last season Forest completely overachieved given the resources that they had. And I think a lot of that was down to the system they played and the manager as well, who found a way of putting the team together that could get results, and had the goal scorer in Chris Wood, who you could always kind of rely upon to pop up and get a goal when they needed it. I think they were hit by Elanga leaving in the summer because he had a degree of pace to wing forward play also. And I think the whole situation, it was strange there during the summer, wasn't it? Because you had Gibbs White who'd gone to Tottenham, but then he hadn't gone to Tottenham, he came back. So I'm sure that unbalanced the squad a little bit. Then you had the manager who's having public disagreements with the owner. And let's face it, the Forest owner is not a guy you want to have a disagreement with, particularly, So I just kind of think the whole pre-season with Forest, then there was all the thing about whether they'd be in the Conference League or whether they'd be in the Europa League. I think there's been a lot of off-field distractions, Nottingham Forest, and they kind of struggled to adjust to that. So, Postecoglou, it's a gamble. In his defence, you could say that, well, it's not his team. Yeah, he didn't bring in any of those players. He might need another window or two to get them together. But I just think I never really fancied Forest to do that well again this season, not with the combination of European football as well, and that's kind of the way it's turned out. And I think that the most seasons you always find there's one or two teams who just drop off compared to what the expectations were. You look at Man United last season, who people thought they might do well, that just didn't happen. And I know Tottenham did win a European trophy, but league-wise, the league form was absolutely abysmal. So I think Forest have been underwhelming this season. I think they've still got a good squad, and maybe Postecoglou will eventually turn around there. But I'm obviously, from an Everton perspective, I'm always delighted to see one of our league rivals struggling to get a foothold on the season as well. And I mean, look at this season as well. I've been really impressed with what Sunderland have done so far this season. They to me have made some excellent progress given the expectations before the season started. And I think, John touched upon this before about there being like a big middle of the league, and within that middle of the league, where you could end up finishing anywhere from 7th to 14th, you could be like Brighton last season, just finish outside the European places, or you could be a lot further down, like Brentford or Fulham. So it's. I'd agree with John that this is probably standard-wise across the different levels within the Premier League one of the poorest Premier Leagues I've seen, but also that suits us and makes it a lot more competitive for us as well, and gives us maybe one of the best opportunities we've had in a while.
Well, I was just going to actually ask you that, John, about the fact that looking at Forest as a team that was up there last year and maybe could be considered the rival if we're trying to finish above them this season. it is encouraging to see them struggle and Everton win, isn't it? Because it is one of those sides that we are looking to compete against this season. Look, whatever we think of Forest as a team and the history, you know, where they've not been up in the Premier League for a long time, they did have a fantastic year last year. And I think if Everton can finish above teams like Forest, then we're going to have a good season ultimately. So it is encouraging in a way to see that, but it is a baffling situation what's going on there at the moment, isn't it?
I think Forest's season, I think this is more, where Forest are now is more what they are. I think last season was the anomaly. And I think at the moment, the evidence we've got suggests I'm right. You know, 2 or 3 relegation battles, 1 good season, and now they're back to being a relegation battle. And I think that's what it is with Forest. I think they're too much of a madcap club. There's too much going on. Marinakis seems to be running a competition to be the club with the most managers in one season. You know, they're already talking about replacing Postecoglou. We're not even out of October yet. So
it's like Mashiri's gone and we need a little bit of craziness from an owner, isn't it?
He makes Mashiri seem straight-laced and rational. You know, he's you know, in all seriousness, there's the rumours about him, and you know, there are allegations, and I'm not going to mention them here for obvious reasons. But you don't need to look too far on the internet to see what the rumours are about Marinakis. So, you know, there's that kind of, you bring that kind of thing into your club and things are going to go wrong. And I think that's what you're going to see with Forest. My own personal prediction about Forest is within 2 or 3 years, they'll be back in League One. Maybe a little bit longer, but, you know, it doesn't seem a sustainable business practice that they've got by everyone. Clearly they're ignoring PSR because they've got some kind of inside information. But eventually it's going to, you know, they're rubbing other people up the wrong way. The way they conducted the business about Morgan Gibbs-White and his release clause, okay, there's probably some underhand dealing from his agents, but that's happened across the board to everyone. And this kind of refusal to accept that, it rubs other clubs up the wrong way, and they're going to get.
Well, the way the way he complains, and the went to UEFA, didn't he, about the situation with Crystal Palace?
That's it. But he's an unscrupulous person. As you know, I'm going to try and be polite about him there and say he's an unscrupulous
be polite for the sake of the show.
Yeah, you know, and eventually these you're inviting people like him into football. It's you know it's never going to be great, is it?
Rob, does it also, in a way, seeing what's happening at Forest, does it make things which seem at the moment relatively calm around what's going on at Everton? I mean, look, we don't need to go over old ground here with what's gone on the last few seasons at Everton, but it seems we've got a bit more of a foothold now, doesn't it, in terms of a consistency and a base to work from. And you know, I quite like the fact that I don't hear much about what goes on behind the scenes. Things just seem to be getting done. And look, it's still relatively early days in terms of the new owners that we've got. But I do look at Forest and I think it's nice that we're not that club anymore, which is the circus and the chaos which is happening. It's nice that when I, you know, read news stories on whatever sports outlet it is or whatever app I'm looking at, the stories aren't about Everton and the collapse of finances or the collapse of, you know, team spirit or bad results or poor things happening, which is what seems to be with what's happening with them. So it makes us look at the moment that bit better, doesn't it?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's kind of 2 things going on. I mean, one, there is value in having no idea what your owner sounds like. Do you know what I mean? I don't know that I've ever heard Dan Friedkin say a word. Maybe I came across a clip once, but you know, I as someone who is from Dallas, Texas, originally, I can tell you that while Jerry Jones is great entertainment, hearing him speak all the time and, you know, hearing him make it about him all the time has not exactly led to great results for the Cowboys, right? I think that the Forest owner is on one level a cautionary tale about having, you know, someone at the helm who has decided that they are the star of this thing, and not the product. And, you know, even if said guy is throwing tons of money at it, you then get into the second piece of this, which is the big philosophical question about what is success. And I would say that if you look at Forest, what is the lesson that you take from last season to this? Because John makes the point, and I don't know if we know enough yet. It's still pretty early in the season, but I don't think John's totally off base. That what if this is who Forest actually are, and last season was the aberration, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the lesson I take out of that is that, as much as it's about the volatile, crazy owner and all his bombacity and all the weird stuff going on with him and how much he's in the headlines, I would also argue that it's a lesson about, what does short-term thinking get you versus long-term thinking, right? And I think that with Forest, they threw and have thrown everything at, we want to get a result, even if it means we burn out really fast, like we burn brightly and then fade away really fast. If we can throw this money in and get to Champions League or get a trophy, is the next several years of instability all worth it? And again, if you win, it's sort of like, if you win, then you can say, hey, I'll take, and some Evertonians, by the way, would say, I would take 5 or 6 years of absolute mediocrity and disappointment if we could just get that one trophy. And maybe that's the right answer. I don't know if that's the right answer or not. But what I would say is that the real lesson of Forest to me, and the lesson that we have learned painfully over the last several years, is that short-term thinking from the owner has a real impact on what ends up happening, not only in that particular season if it doesn't work out, but in the seasons that follow it, because we were in financial jail for a long time because of those decisions. And Forest may be looking at something similar coming down the pike for them. I think what we have to realize is that it's nice to have an owner and an ownership group that appear to want to take things, at a measured, thoughtful, strategic pace. And I do think it's going to take some time as fans for us to kind of readjust the way we think about success and the way we think about process and the way we think about what is the right way to do things. I think it's going to take us time to begin to adjust to that as well. So, look, to me, I look at Forest and look, last season was a lot of fun, and I would have loved to have had a season like that. But there's always a price. And the question only becomes, what is the price as a fan that you would be willing to pay to have kind of a quick burst of a sugar rush season like they had last season, and then look at what they're dealing with now and what they may be dealing with for years to come.
The downfall for them definitely happened after Tokore's goal last season. That was the starting point of it. I'm putting it down to that anyway. Yeah, no, it's just nice not to see Everton be at the receiving end of some of the stuff that's going on over there at the moment. And just another little thing that I noticed this week following the weekend was, obviously our next game after the international break is really tough. It's going to be Manchester City away. And one player for them, Paul, who's really reaching the heights at the moment and showing everyone what he's capable of is, and then he said Alfinger Haaland, then Erling Haaland, obviously not his dad's, but Erling Haaland, yeah, he's started incredible and he looks very much back to his best. And I've seen a few people say this week that he's up there with being probably the best, if not the very best striker the Premier League has seen. And maybe there's a little bit of short-term or, recency bias in that. I can think back to players like, Henry, Shearer for me was just an incredible striker. And I think the comment is he the best goal scorer? Maybe not the best overall striker, because, if we look at complete players, Thierry Henry certainly was a complete striker. But in terms of goal scoring, he's absolutely frightening, isn't he? And it's going to be tough for Everton in that next game to keep him quiet. But also, I think he's in with a real chance if he stays at City of smashing Shearer's record, isn't he?
Yeah, I'm sure he has a chance of smashing Shearer's record. And it's really hard to judge who's the all-time top Premier League striker, isn't it? Because, it depends on what kind of parameters you use. Because from my perspective, if you're playing for the team that's always at the top of the table, then as a striker, but naturally you're going to get more goals. I mean, look at a certain player across the park there. But I I'd actually throw someone like Romelu Lukaku into that discussion, because he played for the team that wasn't winning things. He still scored goals, a tremendous amount of goals as well. I think Harry Kane has to be in that discussion as well. So Haaland's been in City 3-4 seasons now. I think he needs a few more seasons there to be a serious contender for that title. I mean, Thierry Henry was at Arsenal for a long time as well. So yeah, I'm not denigrating the guy. He's a fantastic striker, and from purely selfish point of view, I hope his goal scoring run stops against us, and also that he never comes anywhere near close to getting 60 goals in the season.
No, I think it'd take some going if he ever did that, but we definitely want Dixie's record to stay. John, I mean, is he dragging City, or is he making City look better than they are just from his goal scoring exploits at the moment?
I think it's hard to tell. I mean, I think we're still judging City on how they've been playing last season, and that's a fair assessment. But City are always, under Guardiola, have always been notoriously slow starters. So there's a possibility that, City are just finding the feet and finding the way. So I think it's hard to tell at the moment. But Haaland, he's just absolute quality, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's just,
he's just a brute of a goal scorer, isn't he?
He is, yeah. But he's got such finesse as well and such a great little touch as well that I think that gets lost because of his sheer size and his, the fact that he is a bit of a bruiser as well. But I think I genuinely think he's one of the top strikers in the world, if not the top. People throw the likes of Isak at you, but Isak's not in the same league as him.
It is, for me, it is the way he started the season. It is absolutely frightening what he's doing, and I think he still scored a hatful last season. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but last season, by his standards, he seemed a lot quieter, and this season he looks like he's a lot fitter and stronger, if that's possible. But he definitely looks in the mood, and we are, as I said, going to be under a real threat when we do face City next. Rob, I'll leave the final word to you just on this. You've I know we've talked about your story, how you became an Everton fan, and now you've watched a lot of Premier League football, and certainly I'd say, in the modern Premier League, you've seen a lot of strikers in your time of being a fan. Where does Haaland rank? I mean, like I said earlier, for me, Thierry Henry is probably the most complete striker I've ever seen, but I loved Shearer. I loved Sergio Aguero, for instance. I think Harry Kane's a great shout from Paul as well. I think Lukaku was an excellent finisher as well when he was with us. Where does Haaland rank for you?
I don't think. I mean, obviously, I've been watching, just as a frame of reference. I've been watching the Premier League regularly since 2004. Okay, so and I say that just to say that I did not spend the time watching guys like Shearer and Leonard, others that would have been a fundamental part of a conversation like this. But I did watch a lot of Thierry Henry. To me, I think Haaland is as close to that level of what I'd call death and taxes as a goal scorer that I've seen. I've never seen a guy who came in so kind of high. I remember the hype when Haaland was signed, and I just thought, yeah, well, City signed some new, Terminator Android great player every summer. Whatever. I'm sure he'll be really good. I've never seen a guy come in and just from the second he stepped on the pitch, just obliterate the expectation. Like, he scored so much from the very beginning that it almost made us have to reconsider, well, what is the bar? You know what I mean? Like, I think that those other names that you gave are really good to great players. I think that Erling Haaland, at least based on the productivity, based on the age, and obviously, having skilled wingers and skilled players around him certainly does not hurt his cause. But I think you almost have to squint to pick out a reason why he is not the answer to the question of who is the best Premier League striker in terms of if we're just talking about goals and winning. The only thing he is short of is doing this for another 3 years, 4 years. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's going to be it's going to be more of a question of, can he stay fit? Can he stay engaged? And can he, is he going to stay in the Premier League? I think those are all reasonable questions. And you can think, hey, I like the personality of other players better, or I liked, the more kind of all around game of this guy better. I think they're all very reasonable arguments. But in terms of there's a guy that is going to get on the pitch, and I believe he's going to score almost every time he plays at a rate that seems comically absurd, to the point where you just cackle and laugh because he's so great, and it seems unfair that City of all clubs get to have him. That's how I feel about Erling Haaland. And I think the only way that you can say he's not the best is that he either hasn't had enough of a body of work quite yet, or that you think he's going to get injured, or that you're going to think he's going to get disinterested. Those are not really projectionable things. Those are just things that you're guessing at right now.
Look, I never want to see anybody get injured, and I never want to see anybody, suffer any pain or anything like that. But if he was maybe to pick up a small muscle injury that would keep him out for, 1 week and out of the Everton game, that maybe help us out a lot. But no, I think he goes into the international break, I think, full of confidence, and I wouldn't be surprised if Erling Haaland scores a handful more goals in the next couple of games that Norway have. So we'll wait and see what happens with that. We'll leave it there for this week on the weekly. We've got loads more coming up, as always, even though it is international break. So Mailbag will be back, and the lads will be back, obviously, with Blue Monday and Byline, and we'll be back as well next week with another weekly leading up to that Man City game. But my thanks to Rob. Rob, great to have you back on again, as well, as always. My thanks to Paul as well, and my thanks to John for coming on and joining me on this week's weekly. We'll speak to you again next week. Have a fantastic week. Enjoy the international break, and up the toffees. We'll speak to you soon.